Masechet Menaḥot, Daf Samech Daled. Yesterday we learned this Mishnah about minimizing melacha on Shabbat. In the Bet HaMikdash, whenever you're doing a service that's necessary, that service will override Shabbat. The question is, once you're doing it, do you have to minimize it? And so we saw two different issues. Hachamim are consistent in saying that you do not need to minimize the work on Shabbat. However, you would do it during the week. Also, you do it on Shabbat. So, the amount of how many se'az of barley do you cut in the first place? Hachamim say the same amount on Shabbat, the same amount on a weekday. 3, that's the ideal. That's what you need on Shabbat on a weekday. Then bring the same on Shabbat as well. Rabbi Ishmael says no, you should try to minimize. Now, it happens to be they also have an argument about how many you would bring on a weekday. Like, how many do you need in order to arrive at an isaron, a fine flour? But we'll leave that on the side. That is not the point right now. The point, because Rabbi Ishmael says on the weekday you would have 5, on Shabbat only 3. Hachamim then would agree that on Shabbat 3, but Hachamim say it's the same as on a weekday, also 3. Okay, so it happens to be they disagree on how much you would bring during the week. But the main point is, Hachamim say, whatever is the ideal that you would do on a weekday to make it the best, so you do that on Shabbat. Whereas Rabbi Ishmael says, no, we'll bring less on Shabbat than, according to them, one would bring on a weekday. That's Rabbi Ishmael. And the second machloket is about how many kohanim do you send to cut the barley? According to Chachamim, it's always 3, both in the weekday and Shabbat. Even though you only need 1, but 3 increases the number of people that will be involved, increases the publicity of this mitzvah. And so we do it the same on Shabbat. No compromises to minimize on melacha. Whereas Bichanina Kohanim says, no, we minimize on Shabbat and we send only one person with 1 sickle and 1 basket. Now we're going to analyze and see some other cases where we would or would not minimize melacha on Shabbat, and we'll compare it to these two cases as well. Amar Rabba, Rabbi Ishmael v'Rabbi Ishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, Amru davar ehad. Rabba proposes that Rabbi Ishmael, in our Mishnah, about how many se'az to cut, and a different Rabbi Ishmael, no relation between them, just happen to be the same name. The second one is the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. They both agree on the same principle that we do minimize on Shabbat. Detanya, Arba'a Asar, Shechal Liot Be-Shabbat, Mafshitat Pesach Ad Hehazeh, Dibre Rabbi Ishmael beno Shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. Hachamim Omrim Ad Sheyafshit Et Kulo. When the 14th of Nisan falls out on Shabbat, that means that we're going to have to slaughter the Korban Pesach on Shabbat afternoon. Well, okay, you have to do that because it has to be done on that day. You can't do it the day before, you can't do it the day after. Now, you're not going to eat it on Shabbat. So, in this case, it's a little bit more difficult than another Korban that is required to bring on Shabbat itself for the sake of Shabbat. Here, you bring the Korban, but for the sake of of cooking it and eating it afterwards. And therefore, according to Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, we should do the minimum amount of melacha just necessary to offer the Korban on the 14th on Shabbat. So which means that we'll slaughter it and we will flay it. We will take off the skin, not all of the skin, but only until the breast. Why till there? Because we need to remove the sacrificial parts, the parts that are going to be burnt on the Mizbeach. Okay, we have to remove those parts and we have to do that on Shabbat. So therefore, we'll remove the skin, just enough for that. However, we're not going to skin the whole thing. Rather, we'll wait till Motzei Shabbat. As soon as Shabbat is over, then you can skin the whole rest of it, because that's what you're going to need in order to cook it and eat it. So you see, we do the minimum amount. Hachamim say no. Even on Shabbat, you flay the whole thing, because that's the normal way you would do it. If you were preparing the Korban Pesach on a Monday, then you would skin the whole thing. You slaughter it, you skin the whole thing, you take out the parts, and so on. And so you do it the same way on Shabbat as during the week, because that's the nicer way to do it. Where you're going to leave a korban, it's a nice holy sacrifice, you're going to leave it half flayed, it's not respectful to it. It also will deteriorate more quickly when the skin is attached. Then it keeps it warm, and then it spoils more quickly. It smells. It's not nice. So Chachamim say do it the same. Rabbi Yishmael says minimize it. Mi la amar Rabbi Yishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka hatam kol echad de'efshar la tarchinan hachanameh kevan de'efshar la tarchinan. So we see the same principle. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, when it comes to Korban Pesach, he says since it's possible to do the minimum of what you need to do without extra work, then you should do that. So too, if you ask Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, what would you say about the barley? How much barley to cut? He would say also, since it's possible to bring an isaron, a flour, with only 3 se'ah, and you don't need 5 se'ah, he would agree with Rabbi Yishmael that you bring a minimum amount. And so, shouldn't we propose that they would agree with each other? That you bring the minimum, you do the minimum amount possible, and so they would agree with each other's halachot, even though they're two different applications. That's what Abba proposes. But now the Gemara says, not necessarily. Mimai. Dilmad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Yishmael hacha, ela deleka bizayon kodashim, aval hatam dika bizayon kodashim, emalach kerabanan tzvir aleh. It could be that Rabbi Yishmael only says in the case of the se'ah, where there is no degradation of the consecrated items. There he says, you know what you should minimize. Instead of bringing 5 se'ah that you would during the week, and if that's an easier process, bring only 3. It just means that you're going to have to do more sifting. But it's no degradation of a korban. So yeah, do more sifting and minimize on the number of melachot that you're going to have to violate by cutting and winnowing and grinding and all that. However, even Rabbi Yishmael would agree, when it comes to Korban Pesach, you're going to leave an animal half flayed the whole day, all until at nighttime. That is a bizayon. It's not nice. It's going to start spoiling. Doesn't look nice. Doesn't smell nice. And so Rabbi Yishmael may very well agree with Rabbanan that we flay the whole thing. So it's not necessarily true that that Rabbi Yishmael would agree with Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. And the other way also we could argue. Iname ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Yishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka hatam ela deit abid le sorech gaboa velo sorech achule Shabbat. Aval hacha tela itabed le sorech gaboa vesarich lachule Shabbat ema kerabanan sevira le. Could be that Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Yochanan ben Beroka, would only say regarding Korban Pesach that you minimize, because the service that you had to do for gavoa, meaning for the korban, has already been done. You half flay it, and you remove the sacrificial parts. Good, you've done already what you need to do, and there's no need to violate Shabbat. However, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, may very well agree that when it comes to getting an isaron of barley flour, where at the time that you're cutting it, you have not yet fulfilled what you need to in order to get the isaron. You're still in the middle of the process of doing it. And so he would say, he may very well agree with the rabbis that you can do the same amount as on chol, because all the time that you're reaping and winnowing and grinding, you still have not fulfilled that which is required for the avodah. So therefore you can do the full amount. It's only regarding Korban Pesach where once you flay half of it, that's it. You fulfilled what you need to for Korban Pesach, so you can't do any more. And therefore, we can actually argue both ways. The Rabbah tried to make this equivalence that the two Rabbi Yishmaels must agree with each other, but actually you can argue that both ways, that Rabbi Yishmael would not agree with Rabbi Yishmael ben Beroka, and Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, would not necessarily agree with Rabbi Yishmael. Ela amar Rabbah. So rather we propose that Rabbah, a different proposal by Rabbah to bring an equivalence between different sages. And this time we're going to try both of the Tanaim that are mentioned in our Mishnah. So not an outside subject. Both have to do with the Omer. Rabbi Ishmael Rabbi Chanina Sigan HaKohanim Amru Davar Echad. Ditnan. Rabbi Chanina Sigan HaKohanim Omer. B'Shabbat Niksar B'Yachid B'Magal Echad B'Kupa Achat. ובכל בשלוש קופות ובשלוש מגלות. חכמים אומרים אחד שבת ואחד חול בשלוש קופות ובשלוש מגלות. In the second part of our Mishnah, we learned that according to Rabbi Chanina, Sigan HaKohanim, on Shabbat you send only one Kohen with one sickle and one basket to cut all of the seot, however many you need. And on Hol, we send 3 people with 3 kopot and 3 magalot in order to publicize this mitzvah. Hachamim, however, say both on Shabbat and on Chol we bring 3, we make no change. So therefore we propose that Rabbi Chanina Sigan HaKohanim, just like he says, we minimize on the number of Kohanim, we minimize on Shabbat a violation, so too wouldn't he agree with Rabbi Ishmael and say that you should also bring the minimum number of se'ah, less than during the week. Mi lo ka'amar Rabbi Chanina Sigan HaKohanim atam, kevan de'efshar lo tarchinan, hachanameh, kevan de'efshar lo tarchinan. Rabbi Chanina, when it comes to the number of Kohanim, says, since you can do it with one, do not exert yourself and use 3. Minimize. So too, wouldn't he agree with Rabbi Ishmael that since you can get enough in Isadon with just 3, so do not bother to go and cut 5 se'ahs. So that's Rabba's proposal, to say these are equal. But then we reject that both ways. Mimai. Dilmad kan lo kama Rabbi Ishmael hacha, ela deleka pirsume mileta. Avalatam dika pirsume mileta, ema kerabanan sevira le. Perhaps Rabbi Ishmael would only say you should minimize on the number of se'ah. Because the number of se'ah, there's no publicity. Nobody's looking, counting how many se'ahs are there. So it doesn't really matter to the public how many there are. The only difference will be how many times you're going to have to sift it. So there, Rabbi Ishmael says minimize. But when it comes to how many Kohanim, where the more Kohanim there are, the greater publicity the event will have. This is going to be very important, the publicity for this event, because there were other groups of Jews, the Sadducees, the Baitosim, that said we do not cut the Omer on Shabbat because they had a different calendar, as we will see. And therefore, the rabbis actually had to publicize the fact that we cut the grain even on Shabbat, because it doesn't matter. You always do it on the second day of Shabbat, and second day of Shabbat, the second day of Pesach, and the second day of Pesach could fall out on Shabbat, so you have to do it no matter what. So the rabbis wanted to have a lot of publicity to show that that is the halacha, and not like the Baitosim and the Sadokim say. They always say that we bring the Omer on Sunday. If it's on Sunday, we always cut it Motzei Shabbat. So it's never going to be on Friday night, never going to be on Shabbat. So it's important that we have Pirsumei Nisa. So Rabbi Ishmael may very well agree that yes, we minimize when it comes to the number of se'ah, but we should not minimize when it comes to the number of people, because we want to have publicity, and they would not agree with Rabbi Chanina Sigan HaKohanim. And or we could argue the other way. Iname ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Chanina Sigan HaKohanim atam di'i behad I בשלושה סורך גבוה מתאבד כהלכתו, אבל הכה דלה יתאבד כהלכתו סורך גבוה, מה כרבנן סביר עליהם. You can argue that according to Rabbi Chanina Sigan HaKohanim, he would only say over there regarding the number of Kohanim, he would say, listen, it doesn't matter if you have 1 Kohen cutting a lot or 3 Kohanim cutting less. The service of Gavoa will be accomplished properly, right? It really doesn't matter. One person, okay, take him a little longer because he has to do everything himself, but he's going to get the proper amount, and so it's totally fine. So one person can do the job perfectly. However, when it comes to the number of se'ah, where you will not be able to accomplish it as well, the sorech gavoa. So because if you have 5, then that's better. That's what you would do in the weekday. You'd get 5, so you can get fine flour, and nisaron fine flour and better quality more easily. So it'd be Chanina Sigan HaKohanim may very well say that you should bring 5 se'ah, even on Shabbat. by having one person, that doesn't degrade the quality at all. But by having less se'ah, that could degrade the quality, and you're not going to fulfill the mitzvah of gavoa as well. And so they actually could disagree with each other. Okay, so therefore we try again. Ela amar Rav Asher, Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi Yosef amru davar echad. Actually, Rabbi Ishmael in our Mishnah and Rabbi Yosef in a different context, as we'll see, say the same thing about minimizing on Shabbat. Titnan, ben shenir'a ba'alil, ben shelo nir'a ba'alil, mechalelin alav et haShabbat. Rabbi Yosef omer, im nir'a ba'alil, en mechalelin alav et haShabbat. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. That talks about that witnesses that see a new moon, they should come to the Sanhedrin, to come to Yerushalayim. Even if they live far away, they should travel. Now, what if it's on Shabbat, Friday night? They look up at the sky and they see, oh, I see a new moon, and they live far away. Should they come violate Shabbat? And the answer is yes. They have to come and violate Shabbat because this is important. We have to know when the new moon is going to be. And it could be maybe in Jerusalem, it can't be seen. It's at the wrong angle. It's cloudy. But if a person lives in Haifa, maybe it can be seen over there. So therefore, he's got to travel. As long as he can get there on that day, on Shabbat, then he has to come. So maybe it has to be a little bit closer because otherwise he's not going to make it there anyway. But if he can make it there in time to announce the Rosh Chodesh, you violate and you travel even on Shabbat. Okay, that is the general rule. But now the question is, what if it can be seen clearly? So you're in Tel Aviv or something, and you see the moon, and you see it's a beautiful, bright sky. It's clearly seen. Doesn't matter the angle. Doesn't matter. There's no clouds. There's nothing. So it's clearly seen. According to Tanna Kama, whether it's clearly seen or whether it's not clearly seen, you should violate Shabbat. We want everybody to come, even on Shabbat, to violate Shabbat, even though there's 100 people, 1,000, 10,000 people coming from all over to tell you that the new moon is there, and you can assume someone else came. Doesn't matter. Who knows? You should always come. Maybe next year when it's not so clear, then they're going to say, oh, but it's Shabbat, we don't go on Shabbat. No, so no matter what, we want everyone to violate Shabbat so that in the next month or the next month after that, if it's not clear, we want to make sure everybody comes. So everybody comes, even if it's clear, according to Tanna Kama. Rabbi Yosef disagrees and says, listen, if it's clear, do not violate Shabbat. If you see that the new moon is not clear, and it's only from your particular spot that you're able to see it, you see it's like all cloudy around, and you have just a little hole in the clouds that you're able to see. Or it's like low on the horizon, and only from your spot, maybe you can see it, and other people would not be able to see it. Then you might just be the only one. So then you have to go and violate Shabbat and say. But if it's clear that everybody else can see also, and there's surely people that are closer that will be able to see, so let them go and don't violate Shabbat. So we see that Rabbi Yosef wants to minimize violation of Shabbat. It was a weekday, then you tell everybody, yeah, everybody go. Why not? Okay, mi lo amar Rabbi Yosef hatam, kevan de'efshar lo tarchinan, hachaname kevan de'efshar lo tarchinan. Rabbi Yosef over there says, since you can get testimony about the moon without violating Shabbat further, so do not exert yourself and do not violate Shabbat. Wouldn't he agree with Rabbi Ishmael that since you can get an isaron, a flower, with less se'az, so therefore bring less se'az than you would during the week? So aren't they saying the same thing? We reject this too. Mimai dilma ad kan la kama Rabbi Ishmael hacha ela deleka nimseta ata machshilan nati lavo aval atam denimseta ata machshilan nati lavo emma karabanan sebira le. Perhaps Rabbi Ishmael only says that we minimize and we bring only 3 on Shabbat, even though we bring 5 during the week. There, yes, you should minimize because you don't have to worry about causing a stumbling block in the future. There's no problem of that. You could do this every time it falls on Shabbat. There's no problem. And if it doesn't fall on Shabbat, then you'll bring more. It's all good. But in the case of the Kiddush Lebana, there, if you tell the witnesses not to come on a month where it's clear, then the next month where it's not so clear, they're going to learn the halacha that, oh, you shouldn't travel on Shabbat. Remember last time we didn't go on Shabbat even though we saw the moon? And they're not going to distinguish, and they're going to feel like you shouldn't violate Shabbat. So there, the Rabbi Ishmael may very well agree that even though we minimize Shabbat when it comes to how many se'ahs of barley, we should not minimize on Shabbat when it comes to the witnesses coming, because we got to get everybody to come, because otherwise the next month it will be more problematic. So everybody comes even when it's clear. We could also argue the other way. Ad kan la ka'amar, Rabbi Yosef hatam, ela deleka sorech gaboa, velo nitena Shabbat lidahot, aval achad deika sorech gaboa, ve nitena Shabbat lidahot, ema kerabanan sebira le. Perhaps Rabbi Yosef only says we minimize over there when it comes to the witnesses coming on Shabbat, because it's not a need of gavoa. You call it sorech gavoa, a requirement for heaven, only if it's a korban. Whereas the Kiddush Lebana, although yes, it's very important to have the right calendar, it's not directly affecting a korban. I mean, it will affect korbanot, because depending on when the holiday is, you'll bring korbanot this day or that day. There's Rosh Chodesh korbanot also. Okay, but it's more indirect because you're affecting the calendar, and anyway, they'll probably know what the calendar is anyway from other witnesses. So it's not directly something that has to do with the sacrifice, and therefore you cannot override Shabbat. So the Rabbi Yosef says that we're going to minimize violation of Shabbat when it comes to Rosh Chodesh, because it's not affecting korbanot, and you cannot override Shabbat for other matters that are not sorech gavoa. And someone else will be able to figure out the calendar, tell them that it's the new moon, and they'll bring the proper korbanot, and so we don't lose out on anything. And you can't go and override Shabbat for something that's not a korban. However, Rabbi Yosef may very well agree with Rabbanan when it comes to the number of se'ah, where the number of se'ah, it was required, sorech gavoa. This is a korban. It's a korban mincha that you have to bring from an isaron of the finest flour. So since it's sorech gavoa, it does override Shabbat. And so Rabbi Yosef may very well agree with Rabbanan that you should make no distinction between the number of se'ahs that you harvest on a weekday compared with on Shabbat. Itmar, shachat shete chataot shel sibur, ve'eno sarich ela achat, amar Rabba, v'itema Rabbi Ameh, chayav al hasheniya upatur al harishona. A Baraita teaches that if someone had two animals designated to be a korban chatat for the community, that would be like something, a se'ir lechatat, that's brought on a holiday. Now, you only need one for the holiday, but there's two that are designated for it. And it is also Shabbat. So this is going to relate to minimizing melacha on Shabbat. So we have two designated. We only need one of them. Rabbah says, and some say it's Rabbi Ameh, not Rabbah that said this, chayav ala sheniyah, fatur ala rishona. One is liable for doing shechita on the second one and is not liable for the first. Certainly not for the first, because it's the holiday, so you need to bring one korban as a chatat for the holiday. That's required, so that overrides Shabbat. But the second one, you did not need, so then you'd be liable for doing shechita on the second one and killing it on Shabbat. Now here's the chidush. Va'afilu nitkaper lo b'sheniya, va'afilu nimset rishona kehusha. Even if in the end, it wasn't his intention, but in the end, he actually needed the second one for kapara. For example, he did shechita on the first one, then he did shechita on the second one. Then the blood of the first one spilled and was now no longer available. And so he would, if the second one had not been, he didn't do shechita on the second one yet, he would have to go and get it. And that would be permitted to do that, because on Shabbat you have to bring a sa'ir lachatat for a holiday. The first one spilled. Okay, now we have to bring the second one to fulfill the korban. So in this case, he did it in the wrong order. He killed the first one, he killed the second one. When he killed the second one, his intention was not because he would need it. His intention was to be violating Shabbat. However, in the end, the blood of the first one spilled, and he ended up using the second one. So does that save him? And the answer is no, according to either Rabba or Rabbi Ameh, chayav ala sheniyah. And also, even if the first one is found to be gaunt, a gaunt animal is not a proper proper sacrifice. And so he does shechita on the first one, and then on the second one, he tries to bring the first one. They see, oh, this is gaunt. So it would have been proper anyway to bring the second one. Nevertheless, he didn't realize that at the time that he killed the second one. And so therefore, he is liable for killing the second one. That is something that Abba said. Or maybe the Biyameh said that. Well, let's assume right now that Abba said it. Umi amar Rabba hachi, va'amar Rabba, hayu lefanav shete hataot, achat shemena va'achat kechusha, shachat shemena va'achar kach shachat kechusha, chayav, kechusha va'achar kach shemena patur, ve'lo ad ela, she'omrim lo, have shemena lechatechila ushchot. Did Rabba really say over here that he's liable? But here there's another statement by Rabba that seems to say the opposite. It says, there were two korban hatat offerings, two animals that were designated to be a korban hatat. One was nice and fat, one was gaunt. And he did shechita on the fat one. And then on the gaunt one, he's liable because the first one that was fat was a proper korban. And so that would be used as a proper korban. The second one, he did shechita. No need to do shechita on that one. So he'd be liable for violating Shabbat for the second one. That's a simple case. The other way around, he first did shechita on the gaunt one and then on the fat one. Then he is not liable. And not only that, even if he did not yet kill the fat one, he killed the skinny one. And then he went to Bet Din and says, I have this gaunt animal. It's not really proper to bring it as a korban. The Bet Din would say, go and kill the fat one. And so they would tell him to do it anyway, on purpose. So therefore, in this case, he's patur. So now we have a contradiction. According to the first statement, if he would kill the gaunt one and then the fat one, so you say, even if the first one was gaunt, and he killed the gaunt, and he had already killed the fat one. He is liable. According to this one, he is liable because at the time his intention was not that he was going to use the fat one. He thought that the gaunt one would be okay. So here he's liable. And here you have in the same case it says no. If it was the gaunt one first and then he killed the fat one, even though at the time he didn't realize, no, that's okay. It's patur because he's going to end up using the gaunt one. So we go by the fact that he saves the day. The fact that the second one was shemena, and that is the one that can be used. So therefore, no liability for killing the fat one because that's the one that ended up being used. So we have two answers. One answer is to erase this word, this whole phrase. It's only if he ends up having kapara of the second one, because then in that case the first one was totally good, and if he had not spilt the blood, then the first one would have been proper, but he had already killed the second one when there was no reason to kill the second one. So in that case, he is liable for killing the second one because only after that fact of the blood spilt. But erase from here the kechusha case, just erase those four words. And so there's a difference between the spilling the blood and the case where it was gaunt. That means from the time that he killed the first one, it had already been gaunt the whole time. It was definitely disqualified the entire time. So maybe he didn't realize that, but in fact it was disqualified. So it would be okay, totally okay, even the chatechila to have killed the second one. So that's one way. Or you could say it's a different author. Remember we said either this is Rabbah or the Biyameh. Okay, so say this is the Biyameh. He follows one opinion and says Chayab, and Rabbah says no, Patur. Amar le Rabina Rabashe, Nimset Rishona Kechusha Bibne Me'ayin Mahu. Rabina asks Rabashe, if the first one that he killed was gaunt, but not in an obvious way, it was only gaunt inside in its intestines. After it's slaughtered, you see, oh, this animal was no good. Now, but there was no way to know that at the time that he slaughtered it while it was alive. Batar machshabato azlinan vegabra li isura kamekaven or dilma batar ma'asav azlinan. So what do we say? Do we follow his intention and this person intended to kill it in a prohibited way. So here's a case where he killed 2 animals. When he killed the first one, he thought it was okay. And then he killed the second one anyway, so his intention was for prohibition. Therefore, he should be liable. Or do we say we follow the results, the actions, even though he didn't realize at the time that the first one was gaunt, but now after having killed it and looking at the intestines, we see, oh, this one had been gaunt. He didn't know that at the time that he killed the second one, but turns out that we needed the second one, and therefore he's off the hook. That's Ravina's question to Rav Asher. And Rav Asher answers, Amar le, Lav hainu de Rabba ve'Rabba. This is exactly parallel to the machlok between Rabba and Rava. The Itmar, Shama shetabat tinok bayam, uferash mesuda lehalot dagim, ve'ela dagim hayav. Lehalot dagim, ve'ela dagim ve'tinok, Rava amar hayav, ve'Rabba amar patur. So this is exactly the answer to this question will be the same as the answer to the following question, and there's a machloket about it. The cases where someone heard that a child drowned in the sea. Now he goes and he spreads a net on Shabbat to go fishing to get some fish, and fish came up. Then he's liable. He went fishing, and all he got was fish. So he's liable. So it has nothing to do with saving a child. But what if he went and his intention was to get some fish? But it turns out that he raises up the net and he got fish and he saved the child's life. Rava says he's liable because his intention was not to save the child's life. If his intention was to save a child's life, of course he'd be patur. That overrides Shabbat. Everybody can go and put nets in and try to find that child. But his intention was just to go fishing. He wasn't thinking about. He didn't care about looking. He wasn't looking to save the child, and therefore we follow his intention, and he is liable. Whereas Rabbah says, listen, he knew that there was a child missing, and in the end, he found that child. So even if his intention was not to his intention of putting the net in was for fish and not for the child, but from the fact that he knew that there was a child missing, and in fact he found the child, so you see we follow the action. And so these two sides would say the same thing here. If he knew that if he killed the first one, not knowing that it was gaunt, and then he killed the second one, and in the end they opened it up and found that the intestines were gaunt. So if you say that, well, his intention when he killed the second one was still no good, so therefore Rava would say we follow the intention and he's liable. Rabbah would say, yeah, but in the end they needed it because the first one was gaunt. So even though that wasn't his intention, it's okay. So it seems like this would be subject to the same machloket. Ve'ad kan Rabba la kapatar ela kevan de shama amrina name da'ate atinok aval lo shama lo. But now the Gemara rejects this equation between the two cases and the assumption that Rabba would say chayab also in the previous case and Rabba would say patur also in the previous case. We say not so. We thought that Rabba was following the action, the end result. And that's why he said patur here, because he's following the end result. And so too, he would follow the end result. It turned out that it was gaunt, and therefore he needed the second one. And so he would say patur here also. But not necessarily, because remember, there was an extra point here that this fisherman had heard that a child had drowned in the sea. So therefore we can suggest the other way, that Rabbah only said patur in this case because he in fact heard this news that a child had drowned in the sea. And so we assume that his intention is also to save the child, even though he didn't say so, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he says, listen, I'm going to go fishing, I want some fish. Okay, so that's a violation of Shabbat. But in the back of his mind, he heard that a child went missing and fell into the sea. So in the back of his mind, he's like, who knows, maybe I'll get lucky and I will find the child. So therefore, actually, Rabbah also follows intention. It's just that he thinks that the fact that he heard about it means that he has some intention to save the child, and therefore patur. And Rava just says, well, no, his main intention was to fish, and therefore he is liable. Okay, so the question here, they both think that you follow intention. The question is, what's his primary intention? And so we take into account the secondary intention. However, what if it was a case where the fisherman had not heard that a child fell in at all? He never heard that at all, and he goes fishing. Turns out a child is found in his net. In that case, Rabbah would say, chayav, because his intention was to fish. In the end, yes, he saved the child, but doesn't matter. We follow his intention. And if so, that we follow his intention, then even Rabbah would say, in this case, when he killed the skinny animal, but the animal, it was only skinny on the inside. So his intention when he killed the second one is to violate Shabbat, because the first one in his mind was totally good. And then it turns out that the intestines were skinny, and he needed the second one. Doesn't matter. In that case, even Rabbah would agree that we follow the intention, and the intention was to violate Shabbat. And so, according to that interpretation, there is no difference between Rabbah and Rava. However, and there's another version of this whole discussion. Vikad Amre. Amar le, some say Rav Ashi answered Ravina's question as follows. Hainu peluktahu de Rabbah ve'Rava. In fact, the case where the first animal was gaunt, but only inside, and he killed the second animal before he found out that the first animal was gaunt, is in fact parallel to a machloket of Rabbah and Rava, ditmar, shama shetabat tinok bayam, uferes מסודר להעלות דגים והעלה דגים חייב, להעלות דגים והעלה תינוק ודגים, רבא אמר פטור ורבא אמר חייב. רבא אמר פטור זיל בטל מעשיו, ורבא אמר חייב זיל בטל מחשבתו. In this case, we affirm that it is in fact subject to this machloket, because in the case where a fisherman heard that a child was drowned in the sea, and he went and he made a net with intention to fish, and he got fish, he's liable. If his intention was to fish, and in the end, without his intention, he saved the child and also fish, the Rabbah said patur, Rabbah says he is liable. Rabbah says patur because we follow the actions. And since we follow the actions, that in the end, he actually saved the child. So he had no intention to save the child, but he did save the child. In this version, it doesn't matter whether he had heard that the kid drowned or not. Doesn't matter, because in the end he saved the child with this act of fishing, and therefore he's not liable. Same thing would be when he killed one animal, then the second animal, and only after that he realized that the first animal was gaunt in its intestines, so he's not liable because he needed the second animal, even though it wasn't his intention. Whereas Rava would say he is liable because we follow his intention. His intention was to fish, so he's liable. It doesn't matter if in the end he saved the child. His intention was to violate Shabbat by killing a second animal. It doesn't matter that in the end we needed the second animal. He is still liable. Amar Rabba, Chole shamduhu legro geret ahat. ורסו 10 בני אדם והביאו 10 גרוגרות בבת אחת פטורין. אפילו בזה אחר זה, אפילו קדם והבריא בראשונה. Rabbah said, if you have a sick person and the doctor said that he needs a fig in order to get better. Now, there's no figs around, there's none in the house, there's only figs on the tree. So someone has to go and pluck a fig. Now, you could have one person go, pluck a fig and bring it back and save his life. Fine, but what if 10 people go? They each go independently and they bring 10 different figs, and even if they bring it simultaneously, they are all patur. And even if they come one after the other, still they are patur, and even if he got better by the first one, while the other guy still is coming in, they're all patur. Why? Because who knows who's going to be first? So that even if you see one guy, he's going to that tree, he's going to get a fig. Okay, but he might take too long, and maybe the patient will die in the meantime. So I go to another tree, and I get another fig, and a third person goes to another one. And we don't know who's going to be able to get there first, and maybe those few seconds will save his life. So therefore, even though in the end, we only needed one, so only the first one that got there is the one that saved his life. Nevertheless, we don't say now the other 9 violated Shabbat because look, they plucked a fig and it didn't help anybody. No, their intention was to save the person, and who knows, they could have been first. בערב הבא, חולה שעמדוהו לשתי גרוגרות, ויש שתי גרוגרות בשתי עוקסים, ושלוש בעוקס אחת, הם עיניהו מייטינן, שתיים מייטינן דחזולה, או דילמה שלוש מייטינן דקה ממעתה כסירה. Rava has a follow-up question. Let's say you have a sick person, and the doctors say he needs 2 figs in order to get better. Okay, so one person goes and runs to the tree, and he finds that there's 2 figs that are attached to 2 stems. In order to get those 2 figs, we'll have to break 2 stems, which is 2 violations. Or there are 3 figs that are all attached to 1 stem, and therefore he can break just 1 stem, only 1 violation, and get the 3 figs. But the thing is, he doesn't need 3 figs. He only needs 2 figs. So what should he do? Should he bring the 2? Because that's all that's necessary. Therefore, minimize on the number of figs and not go and do an action that will end up collecting more figs that are necessary. So just bring the 2, even though that means breaking 2 stems. Or should we bring the 3 because he's doing less reaping? He's only breaking a single stem, even though in the end he's bringing more figs than are necessary. The answer is Pishita Shalosh Maitinan. It's obvious that he would bring the 3. Te'ad kan la ka'amar Rabbi Ishmael hatam, la dechi mema'et ba'achila ka mema'et kesira. Avalacha dechi ka mema'et ba'achila ka mapesha kesira, vadai Shalosh Maitinan. Rabbi Ishmael in our Mishnah, who said that one should reap 3 se'ah of barley on Shabbat instead of 5 se'ah of barley that one would normally do during the week. So he said you should minimize the amount of grain that you're going to bring. Yes, he said to minimize there, but only there, because in that case, when you minimize the amount of food that you're bringing, the number of se'ah, you're also minimizing the amount of reaping that you'll do. And so the less food that you bring, the less se'ah of barley that you'll bring, the less reaping. So Rabbi Ishmael says you should minimize on the melacha of Shabbat. And so minimize, of course, you need the minimum amount in order to end up with an isaron, but all you need is 3 se'ah for that. So Rabbi Ishmael would say you minimize the melacha on Shabbat and you minimize the melacha by doing less reaping. But even Rabbi Ishmael would agree that in this case, if you are minimizing the amount of food by getting only 2 figs, you're going to end up having more a plucking of stems. You're doing kitzira, more reaping. And so that doesn't make any sense. By getting less food, you're violating another melacha of reaping. So then, for sure, even Rabbi Ishmael, who says in general, yes, you should have to minimize on a violation of Shabbat, would certainly agree that you minimize violation by bringing more, by bringing 3, because they're all attached to 1 stem. Certainly break only 1 stem and bring the 3. Next Mishnah, Misvat HaOmer lehabi min hakarob. The best way to perform the Korban Mincha of the Omer, that's the barley that we bring on the 2nd day of Pesach, is to cut it from a field that is closest to Yerushalayim. We'll see why in the Gemara. Lo bikera karob Yerushalayim be'inoto mikol makom. However, if the barley that is near Yerushalayim has not ripened yet, so then you can't use that. And so, if so, you can bring it from anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, even if it's far from Yerushalayim. Maaseh sheba omer migagot serifin ushtehalechem mibikat ayin soher. And in fact, there was a time when all the barley, they couldn't bring barley, we'll see why in the Gemara, from close by, and they had to bring the barley for Korban HaOmer from Gagot Sirifin. That's a place over here, Si Sirifin, fairly far from Yerushalayim. And the same also, the wheat that one brings on Shavuot for Shtei HaLechem also should come from something close by. But it happened once that the the wheat close by was not available, not ready, and they had to bring it all the way from Ayin Socher. My Ta'ama, the Gemara asks, what's the source for this halacha that one should try to bring the Mincha Ta'omer from a place close to Yerushalayim? Ibaitema Mishum Karmel. One answer is because the pasuk describing the grain offering calls it Karmel, which means fresh ears. Fresh means as fresh as possible. If you're going to have to bring it from far away and travel for many hours or days, then it's not going to be so fresh. It's not going to be soft. It's going to get hard and dried out. And therefore, it's best to bring it from somewhere close to Yerushalayim, as close as possible, so that it will be fresh. Another answer is that one should not go over the misvot, postpone the misvot. So that means you're in Yerushalayim, you're in the Bet HaMikdash. So second, we got to go and get some barley. Okay, so now you're going to pass by a field that has perfectly good barley in it. So we don't pass by misvot to go and postpone it and go somewhere far away. Rather, the first chance you get to do a mitzvah, do it immediately. That shows our zeal and love to do the mitzvah, and that's why we get it from the closest place possible. Maaseh Sheva Omer, Migagot Sirifin. The Mishnah says there was a time, an incident, that they had to bring it from far away. What happened? Tenor Banan, Keshesaru Malche Bet Chashmonai, Ze Al Ze, Vayahur Kenos Mibachus, Varistobulos Mibifnim. One time there was a civil war between the two kings of the Hasmonean dynasty. This is talking about the two sons of Shalom Sion Hamalka. Shalom Sion, she was a very good queen and well liked. Was successful. During her reign, she was the queen, but of course not Kohen Gadol. She appointed her oldest son, Hyrcanus, to be the Kohen Gadol. After she died, Hyrcanus was supposed to take over and be both the king and the Kohen Gadol. However, Hyrcanus had a younger brother, Aristobulus, who was more energetic, more ambitious than Hyrcanus, and Aristobulus actually made a rebellion and took over a lot of the country and took over the Bet HaMikdash. But Hyrcanus didn't give up yet. He went and found some allies, and Hyrcanus came and besieged Yerushalayim. So quite a terrible situation of a civil war, where you have Hyrcanus is on outside of the walls, making a siege, and Aristobulus is inside. He's performing as Kohen Gadol. In the end, both of them appealed to the Romans to come and help, and the Romans came, and then from then on, the Romans actually took over. I mean, they appointed Hyrcanus because he was the weaker one, but in fact, the Romans were in charge ever after. So this was a really terrible story. Now, even though they were fighting each other and were about to kill each other, nevertheless, they did cooperate so that the korbanot would continue. Bechol yom vayom hayu mishalshin lahem dinarim bekupa umalin lahen timidin. They wanted to still perform the korban tamid every day. And so every day, the people inside would lower down money in a box, and then when the people outside, Hyrcanus got the money, they would put an animal inside. Two animals for the two korban tamid. So in other words, even though they wanted to kill each other, but everybody felt that the show must go on, and it's very important to have the korbanot every day. So they still worked that out. The animals obviously are outside the city. That's where the farms are. So they had to bring them in each day. היה שם זקן אחד שהיה מכיר בחוכמת יוונית, לעז להם בחוכמת יוונית, אמר להן, כל זמן שעסוקים בעבודה, אין נמסרים בידכם. למחר שרשלו להן דינרים בקופה, והעלו להם חזיר. There was an elderly man inside the walls, but he was a traitor, he was a spy. And he understood Greek wisdom. There's a few interpretations about Greek wisdom. Some people think it means Greek philosophy, but that has nothing to do with the context here. Instead, you see la'az, he communicated using Greek wisdom. This seems to be a reference to pantomime. or mimes, as we know them today. Pantomime, in fact, was invented by the Greeks because they would put on shows, plays, and have speakers that spoke to large audiences in amphitheaters and other public places. Now, they didn't have microphones, so if a speaker or an actor is going to be presenting in front of many thousands of people, even though an amphitheater has good acoustics but not so good, people in the back would not be able to hear. And therefore, they had to learn the art of acting things out, almost like charades, so that even if someone is speaking, so he would be able to use various gestures to show what he was talking about, so that even the people in the back who couldn't hear every word would still understand what he was talking about. And so that developed into the art of pantomime. So that's what it seems to be talking about here. This elder, who was a traitor to those inside, gave advice to the people outside. Now, he couldn't scream it because then everybody would hear and they'd go kill him. And so instead, he's able to give this message by doing some charades. And he said to the people outside, as long as they are continuing the avodah in the Bet HaMikdash, you, people outside, are not going to win, because the service of the Bet HaMikdash is protecting the walls of Yerushalayim. You'll never be able to get in. And the people outside got the message, and so the very next day, when the people inside lowered down money inside a box, people outside, instead of putting inside a sheep, they put a pig in it. Kevan shehigia lahasi choma, nasi pornav bechoma, v'nizdazea Eretz Yisrael 400 parsa al 400 parsa. So they're lifting it up, and as soon as the pig reached halfway up the wall, it stuck its hooves into the wall of Yerushalayim, and Eretz Yisrael shuddered. It could refer to an earthquake. Josephus has a parallel to this story. He says there was a terrible storm that destroyed all of the land, and it extended 400 parsa by 400 parsa. And this would explain the reason why they could not find any barley or wheat close by. So they had to go far away. At that time, the rabbis made a couple of gezerot. And it says, cursed is anyone who raises pigs. Why are you raising pigs in Eretz Yisrael? They're not kosher, can't use them. And look, because they had this pig, that was just brought upon this terrible thing. And furthermore, cursed is anyone who teaches his son Chochmat Yevanit, because Chochmat Yevanit was used by this traitor to give a message to the enemy. And therefore, no one is allowed to learn Chochmat Yevanit. It could also relate to Greek entertainment, Greek philosophy, Greek ways of thought, or things like that, because the more one learns that, the more likely there's a chance that the person will assimilate and have more allegiance to the Greeks and Romans versus Jewish continuity. And so this is also dangerous in that sense. So they said from now on, one is not allowed to teach their children Chochmat Yevanit. It's interesting that in the Bavli only has this phrase, wisdom of the Greeks. In the Yerushalmi it says Greek language. And that makes sense because in Eretz Yisrael, where they were under the Greeks and then the Romans, the Greek was actually a spoken language. That was the common spoken language certainly among the elite. And so don't teach your children Greek, because if you went to an elite school, you'd learn Greek. So they said, don't teach Greek. In Bavel, nobody was speaking Greek. There were people that were Hellenized, meaning they knew Greek education and Homer, and they learned about Greek philosophy, but not speaking Greek. So it makes sense that the equivalent in Bavel wouldn't be teaching Greek, because they weren't speaking Greek anyway, but rather the knowledge, Greek wisdom, certain Hellenistic ideas, including pantomime. ועל אותה שעה שנינו, מעשה שבא עומר מגגות צריפין ושתי הלחם מבקעת עין סוחר. And regarding this incident is what we were making reference to when we said that at that time they had to bring the Omer far away from Gagot Sirifim, and on Shavuot still there was not grain available nearby, and they had to bring it from Ayin Socher. כי מתה עומר, לה הבו יד איה מהחי תהיה עומר, ואחרזו. Continuation of the story. This story happened sometime before, but then when it came time for Pesach and they had to bring the Omer, they didn't know where to get it from, because they looked all around Yerushalayim, they couldn't find anything. Atahu Hirsha, Oteb Hada Yeda Igara, Vechada Yeder Aserifa. A certain deaf person came and he pointed one hand to a roof and the other hand to a hut. So he's using charades to explain what he was talking about, like sign language. Amar lehu Mordechai, Mika duchta deshma gagot serifin, or serifin gagot. A certain person named Mordechai. Rashi says it was Mordechai from Megillat Esther, but that can't be. That was centuries earlier. And so someone else whose name was Mordechai came and tried to figure out what this deaf person was saying, was trying to express. And he asked, is there a place called Gagot Sirifin, which would mean roof hut or hut roof, because that's what he's pointing to. He's making a reference to a place. So Bedaku v'ashkechu. So they checked the map, and sure enough, they found a place by that name. And so this deaf person knew whatever he was traveling around, and he knew that there was barley in that place, and they went and they got it. Then it came to Shavuot and they needed wheat. They didn't know where to get it from, so they made an announcement. Does anybody know? Sure enough, this deaf person, he knew where it was. So he put one hand on his eye, and the other hand he pointed to a door latch, like this, a door latch. And so that's again, Amar lehu Mordechai, umika duchta dishma ayin socher or socher ayin bedaku v'ashkechu. So Mordechai said, oh, look, he's pointing to these things, another game of charades, and he says, oh, is there any place called ayin socher or socher ayin, meaning eye, latch eye, some place that's called that? And they checked the map, and sure enough, yes, there was such a place, and that's how they brought the wheat for the loaves. Hanhu shalosh nashim, daitu shalosh kinin, chada amra lezibati, v'chada amra leyammati, v'chada amra leonati. And now another story about this Mordechai who was able to figure out riddles. And one time there were 3 women that brought 3 nests. Nest means a pair of birds. And they brought it as for korbanot. They brought it to the Bet HaMikdash. One of the women, they said, why are you bringing it? She said, for zivati, meaning she was a zava. Now, if someone is a zava, and part of their purification ritual is that they have to bring 2 birds. One is an olah, and one is a hatat. The second woman said, I have to also bring for yammati. We'll see what that means. The third one says for onati. We'll see what that means. So now the Kohanim received these 3 pairs of birds from these three women, and they each said what it's for. Savur mina zivati zava mamash. So they understood that the one who said for because I'm zava understood that she literally was a zava and therefore has to bring these 2 birds. Leyamati mamash. They understood when she says yam mean like a sea flows. So she also meant that she had a flow of blood. The word lazuv, zava, literally also means a flow of blood at the wrong time of the month. And so she also was a zava. She just used a different word. And when the other one said, leonati, for my time, that means it's my time for being purified from being a zava. So they understood that also she was a zava. Tekuluhu hadachatat vechada olah. And therefore, they put them down that these 6 birds that they brought, half of them would be korban chatat and half of them would be korban olah, because since they're all zavot that are coming to be purified, each one needs a chatat and an olah. Good. So that's how they wrote it down, and that's how they were planning on sacrificing them. Amar lehu Mordechai, Shema bezov sikena, Shema bayam sikena, Shema be'ayna sikena. But Mordechai was there, and remember, he was good at solving riddles. And so he said, wait a second, they just said zivati, yammati, onati. Maybe they don't mean that they were all actually zavot, but rather the first one was in danger because of a flow of blood. It's not, the problem wasn't that she was tameh zava. She had a medical problem and she almost died. And then she got better. And the other one that says yammati, she meant yam. She was at sea, she was on a boat and it was in danger, and then she survived. And the other one, she had an eye infection and it got better. And they're all bringing these korbanot as voluntary offerings to give thanks. Tikulhu olotninu. In that case, all 6 birds have to be a korban olah. You see, if it's a voluntary offering, then a voluntary offering can be an olah. You cannot voluntarily give a korban hatat, and so it would be a mistake to offer it as a chatat. If the Kohanim had done that, then number one, they're bringing chatat offerings that are illegitimate, and also it would not fulfill the vow of the woman who said we're going to bring korban olah. So it's important. Bedok ve'ashkach. So they checked it out. They asked the woman further exactly what happened, and they found out that Mordechai's interpretations were, in fact, correct. V'hainu ditnan petachya al hakinin. Ze Mordechai lama nikra shemo petachya shepotech devarim v'dhoshan v'yodea b'shivrim lashon. And this explains what it says in the Mishnah in Shekalim, that there was a man named Petachya. He was in charge in the Bet HaMikdash over the birds. Anyone who brought a bird offering, he would check it out. Why did you bring them? And he would put if they brought money, he put the money in a box that was designated either for Olah or for Korban Hatat, and make sure everything was done correctly. Why was his name? And in fact, this was Mordechai. His real name was Mordechai. Why did they call him Petachya as a nickname? Because he would solve. Liftoach, it can mean to open, but it could also mean like to unlock, to solve a riddle. So he would understand things, solve things, and explain them. And he knew also 70 languages, all the languages in the world, so that whoever came, he would be able to understand exactly what they were talking about. We ask, what's the big deal that he knew 70 languages? Every member of the Sanhedrin knew 70 language. It was a requirement. Damar Rabbi Yochanan en moshibin beSanhedrin ela ba'alei chochma, ba'alei mar'eh, ba'alei koma, ba'alei zikna, ba'alei keshafim, v'yod'im shiv'im lashon, shelo teh Sanhedrin shomat mipi haturgeman. Rabbi Yochanan says one cannot appoint to the Sanhedrin someone unless they are a person of great wisdom and who has a great appearance and who is nice and tall and who has of a good age, and also who knows how to do magic. Why do you have to know how to do magic? Well, because they're going to be judging cases of magicians, of people that come and they do sorcery or whatever. You have to see, are they really doing it? Are they just doing a magic trick? So because they have to judge matters of keshafim, so they have to know all about it to be able to judge it properly, and all the other things, so that they should command respect. And they also have to know 70 languages, so that the Sanhedrin will not have to hear from a translator. If you need a translator might mistranslate something, and then they'll give a wrong ruling about a case because they just misunderstood a word. And so therefore, everybody has to know 70 languages. So what's the big deal that you're praising Petachya, that he knew 70 languages? It's not just that he knew 70 languages separately. He was able to combine the various languages and interpret them. He can make all kinds of combinations of the languages. So he was a real master of language and of riddles and of solving. He could do crossword puzzles. He could play Scrabble. He needed all these skills, and that's why regarding Mordechai, he was also called Bilshan, that Balal. He could combine various languages. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.